On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Shawn Stewart. He is the VP of Engineering at Apartment List. We're going to be talking about the relationship between an individual contributor and a manager, and in relation to career progression. You know, there's a lot of dynamics. That partnership between a manager and people on that person's team is very complicated. It's got a lot of moving parts, and we're going to kind of explore that. We're going to understand, what does it mean for somebody to meet or exceed expectations? A lot of times the burden is on the individual contributor to demonstrate skills to progress, but what about the manager? That they have also responsibility to help in career progression, and we'll kind of dive into these topics with Shawn. I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you.
Hey, Amir, thanks for having me on board. This is one of the topics that I'm most passionate about, so I'm really excited to talk about it with you.
Fantastic. All right. Before we start, tell everyone what Apartment List does.
Yeah, Apartment List is an ILS, which also serves renters who are looking for apartments. In this day and age, folks are looking for more flexible living accommodations, and Apartment List leverages AI to help make what we call a love connection, to help renters find a place that they love. We leverage AI as a way of helping narrow down what is otherwise a pretty heavy search process and painful for a lot of folks to something that feels more delightful, akin to a concierge type service.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So the topic, that relationship between an IC and a manager. And I was actually thinking about this because I think when we first spoke about this and the more I've thought about it, I think it's an interesting dynamic. And a lot of times, and maybe we'll start from this angle, is that when we look at that relationship, we look at it from the manager's point of view as someone there to help the individual contributor move forward. And because that person has attained that level, they are the benchmark, they're the arbiters of this progression. That's the responsibility of the role. That relationship to the IC from a manager's perspective is tricky. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of dynamics. There's personalities. Talk to us maybe from the outset, from a manager's point of view, that relationship to an IC. What does that look like?
You know, first you have to lay out the ground rules, and the ground rules for that relationship are what are the expectations by level for the IC and the manager. So you have to start with that. Once you understand what is expected of the IC, the manager steps in as a coach who also has a responsibility to benefit from the output of the players on their team to drive towards some goal. And so that might be some business outcome, a project-based delivery or execution outcome, what have you. So the manager plays a role of both the coach of the individual and the GM of the output that is expected from the team. Now, the incentive for the IC is they're stepping into this role, right? We'll use maybe a sports analogy, as a player. And they're hoping that this role will give them the opportunity to develop to the next level in their career. And the way that you identify that they've achieved this is through the outcomes that they're able to deliver. So it's a really beautiful symbiotic relationship between the manager and the player that also has the benefit of a really great business outcome on the other side of it.
That's a great explanation. And you know, I guess you mentioned they're responsible for the output as the GM of that team. They're also managing as a coach. So before we talk about the IC, let's talk about the manager and how we are sure that what they are managing is accurate. Because I think to talk about the IC to manager level relationship, we almost have to explore the manager and their manager's relationship, because that's the check and balance. Because if you don't have that right, then the person who's the GM might not necessarily be looking at the right things. They might not be, you know, again, we're not saying managers always do this, but I think there's a check and balance that's very important in this dynamic to make sure that things are on track and that those goals are not subjective to that manager's standards, that manager's personality, that manager's style of management. I guess talk to us a little bit about that relationship and how that maybe that check and balance plays out.
You know, the manager's always looking to figure out what opportunities they have. And I've been fortunate or challenged in some cases to land in a role at a specific time in an organization's, history. The company could be going through a difficult time and they're looking to turn things around. They could be going through a boom where they need to grow. And so the opportunities are going to be different based on the situations that you step into. In other cases, you might step into an existing team that has all of the great underpinnings to be, one of the most amazing teams at accomplishing these goals, or a team that is a bit disconnected from the mission. And so the manager has to come in and assess both the time and place as it relates to the opportunity, and then the individuals themselves to see if they're able to meet these goals. So it's not always a case where the manager will see the team that they have as able to successfully achieve the mission, and so they'll have to make some changes. And in other cases, they're making assessments around each individual to figure out what are the gaps or what are the areas that these players could play towards this goal. So that's the first part. The second part of it, right, is then being very transparent about the steps to getting there. And what's really interesting here is that the manager is really talking about the what, and they're using the what as a lever to then unlock an interpersonal one-on-one how opportunity. And that becomes the really beautiful part of the week over week conversation in the one-on-one that then ties back to how is the how tracking to the what, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense, and I think that helps kind of set the stage in terms of the hierarchy of how management helps focus the team and how there's a check and balance. Because obviously, in the episode, we're talking about that relationship between the IC and the manager, and I guess one of the questions that probably will come out in this discussion is, the IC obviously wants to move forward. They want to progress as well in their career. They want to be evaluated for promotions and salary increases and all other thing. That relationship is very tricky because the manager's success of that team rides on the individual contributor. The individual contributor success rides on that dynamic. But also, there's one manager, there's multiple people on the team. So the accountability chain is slightly different. And when you look at from the IC's point of view, they do feel like the manager does hold power. They do hold sway. That relationship from an IC's perspective, that dynamic of entrusting somebody with your career, talk to us a little bit about when things are good, and then also when things might not be good from an IC's perspective, that that manager relationship isn't as healthy as it could ideally be.
Yeah, great question. And pretty complex too. There's a third player in the dynamic, and that third player is the team. So as an IC, I have to look at my position within the group of individuals that I'm going to be playing with. And I'm hoping that my manager is doing the same thing, right? And so I could have an ineffective manager and a great team that I've been able to connect with, and then maybe look at the expectations I'm required to have by level, and also the business goals, and identify in a healthy work environment that maybe my manager is ineffective. And sometimes that's one of the problems. It could be things like a manager could be not as strong as a coach as is needed by the team, in that they can identify the goals, but don't know how to help the team drive to the objective. And in some cases, I've seen teams rally together and they find ways to figure out how to get there. But in a really, really great dynamic, collaborative environment, what you find is the manager is not only talking to the individual player, but they also are having this conversation openly with the rest of the team, so that the team is aware of everyone's positions and how they all play together. To me, I like to set goals that are well understood by the team, so that you reduce competition. There's some managers that are not as effective, and they see competition as a way to drive outcomes. That tends to be a very short-lived situation, because as soon as you hit these short-term objectives, you break down the team dynamic, which ends up hurting in some cases that individual IC or other players within the team. So in my experience, the very best way to build this relationship is for the manager to also pull in that third party, the team, into that conversation.
I like that. That's actually very well laid out. And I think obviously there's different ways managers incentivize or push or, try to get the team individual contributor dynamic to work. When you're looking at career progression and we're looking at somebody who has to sit down on those one-on-ones, they have to sit down for their maybe annual reviews, however frequently they are. When those conversations of meeting exceeding are had, how does a manager keep them as objective as possible? And the reason I ask is potentially as a manager, sometimes the best engineer, their career progression is to go into management. And that, to me, it's almost learning a slightly nuanced new skill set, or it's someone who gravitates towards people management because they're really good at it. But as a manager, being objective is part of the goal. It's not the easiest thing set to be done, right? I don't think it's an easy thing, just say because I'm going to be objective. How do you measure an IC when it comes to the bigger reviews to make sure, as they're looking at the levels of meet, exceed type of dynamic, that they feel that this is very objective and not, introducing any type of bias or subjectivity into that process?
Yeah, totally. And, some of those biases are not necessarily based on the relationship between the manager and the IC.
Agreed.
It could be, in some cases, engineering organizations at a particular company that are not run well. The solution, in my opinion, is the calibration process. How do you calibrate yourself as an IC and a manager to the role? And there are a few ways that you could do that. Ultimately, you want to make sure. I've been in the experience where I've interviewed folks for hire, and they'll tell me that they're a staff engineer at another organization, but they don't quite level up to some of our more junior engineers, right? That's a big problem. And so what you want to be able to do as a manager is give confidence to your team that the program that they are running is going to objectively have this engineer level up with other organizations, right? Because part of it is not only the opportunities I give to my ICs within the company I work for, but also creating the type of program that gives them opportunities elsewhere. And if engineers feel really good about that, they're more likely to stay within your program because they're getting all of the indication that your manager is a great coach, right? And nobody wants to leave a really great growth opportunity. The other calibration opportunity, I think, is within the company itself. I like to, an engineer, in my opinion, is if I'm doing my job well as a manager, I'm creating a really strong player. And I need to make sure that that strength is being felt in other areas of the organization. So I might talk to another manager and ask them, how do you feel about this individual? How are they showing up cross-functionally outside of my particular group? I might go to business stakeholders. And within the team, I might, speak to other members of the team to find out, what their, how they feel about this individual's ability to work and collaborate with the rest of the team. And, if for whatever reason this person were to leave the organization, leave the team, what would be the impact of their absence? These are, I think, really great questions to be able to ask on an ongoing basis to really ensure that what you're really helping this individual achieve is an objective growth trajectory that's going to take them to something that's very impactful.
I love that calibration opportunities. I think you provided a couple examples there, and you mentioned you have to calibrate and understand the level so that you can appropriately guide, mentor. You mentioned something when we were speaking before, and I thought it was fantastic. I hadn't really heard someone bring this prompt up, and you mentioned during the interview process when somebody's an individual contributor going through the interview loop, should they, or could they, or can they? I mean, I guess they can, but should they? Would it be appropriate to ask the manager how many people have been promoted during under them during their managerial career? Is that something that you've heard very often, and is it something that should be asked more often?
I don't hear it enough, but I do ask other managers this question, and I wish more ICs would, because that question to me, if it came from an IC, tells me that they really care about their career progression, right? And they're coming in because they want to grow. They're coming in to do more than I'm hiring them for. And that is the best type of individual that you could ever hire. The second follow-up question to that is, how did you promote these people? So sometimes it's not necessarily about quantity. Sometimes it's about how effective are you at promoting people? How do you have confidence in promoting someone? I think that's sometimes more important than the number of people, because sometimes the numbers can tell you things that are don't really align with the capabilities of the manager. You could be in a very fast-growing organization where they're just looking to get as many folks into the seat. Hopefully, even in situations like that, you're still looking for great talent. But it does happen sometimes where you're really just looking to get a lot of folks in, or maybe you're trying to backfill a position in a very short time frame. But how you drive confidence in promotion, how many people have you promoted? How do you go about promoting? These are great questions to ask as an IC.
I love it. Yeah, I don't hear a lot of individual contributors ask that question. I think when you brought it up, I'm like, actually, it should be on the forefront. If you're looking to grow your skill sets, you want to know what those bars are. It goes back to the calibration that a manager has to do. You need to understand what the rubric is. Otherwise, if you don't know what the grading rubric is, it's kind of hard to understand what you're shooting for in that performance review, in that annual review. When you look at someone, let's say an individual contributor that's not moving forward, at what point do we look at, because obviously if you do have a case where you have somebody on your team, they're just not progressing, is it a case of we look at that person, the employee, or do we start looking at the manager, or do we look at both? Obviously, you mentioned team dynamic here, but in the case where somebody is not moving forward, their career seems to be stuck at a particular level in a particular team, in a particular company, I guess it's a community question. I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but who starts to share some of that?
So the answer is it depends. There are some time thresholds for certain types of roles. They're typically more junior roles where you expect, there's a deliberate expectation that an individual should not stay in this role past a certain amount of time, and that they should be developing to get to the next level. There's a difference between meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, and being ready for promotion. In my opinion, exceeding expectations, in engineering, for example, we have different levels. We have about 7 levels in engineering, but within each level, I grade on a 4-axis rubric. It's project and team impact, better engineering, people impact, how am I influencing the people around me, and then my organizational impact. And there's a different weighted expectation in each axis per level, right? Sometimes you might find an IC who spikes in 1 or 2 axes. That is an individual who's exceeding expectations. They're still performing at their level, but they're spiking. They're doing more in 1 or 2 axes. Consistently delivering value on your level is really about meeting the bar, not just in those 4 axes, but holistically representing the role. And I'll get to your original question in just a moment, but I want to talk about promotion first. Promotion doesn't necessarily mean I'm exceeding expectations. It means I'm literally operating at a completely different level. And I like to use a running analogy. I like to run. I get up every day. I run about 4 miles a day. And in order for me to do this consistently, I have to be able to prevent a lot of bad things from happening. Things like getting sick, getting hurt, right? It's really, really hard to be consistent over a very long period of time. Sometimes achieving consistency over a long period of time is so important and impactful that you should promote that individual. right? It could be a tech lead who's been sitting in the role for a really long time. So it's not always a bad thing that someone stays in a role or it stays at a consistent output. On the other hand, you might have someone who's really consistently delivering and keeping them exactly in that role. I've seen people promoted too soon or promoted when they didn't want to be promoted, and you see their performance trend completely change as a result of it. So this is where the discretion of the manager really comes in to be able to assess where this player should be. Sometimes a consistent performer that does not move is the very best thing for that person, for that IC, for the manager, and for the organization. And in other cases, that consistency is just so, it is just such an outsized impact in and of itself. You promote that individual to the next level. And in other cases, there are folks that are really looking to work hard to step up to the next level and exceed on different axes, and you should be able to give them the opportunity. So a good manager is going to be able to identify which of the three that individual falls within.
I was going to ask you, if you had advice for, let's say, managers that are listening, is there anything they can do to you that are some absolute like building block type things that maybe somebody overlooks to help this relationship? Are there some, and again, probably a lot of managers do all those things, but are there some fundamentals that, like, listen, these are the ones you key in on, all the other things are really ancillary to this?
Yeah, a question I ask, which seems a bit unconventional, is what would you like to do after you leave my team? And it's a really good way of anchoring your IC, your teammate, into a growth mindset, to think beyond where they are. And if people start thinking about the optionality they can create for themselves, what you tend to find is that folks start to operate outside of your rubric and outside of the tasks that you've given to them. And in my experience, beautiful things starts to happen. Folks start to bring in the opportunities that they're looking at outside into their teams. So I would always approach managing the players on my team by helping, really orient myself to their ambition beyond the space and time of my group. And I think that brings a lot of returns to the group itself. And it creates an environment where the team really feels like their manager has their best interest at heart.
Fantastic. Shawn, I think I could ask you endless amounts of questions and you'll be able to continue to provide brilliant answers, but I got to let you get back to the job actually of managing. I wanted to ask, if someone does want to ask you for some advice, because we were talking about the team, the IC, and the manager here. I guess somebody might have a question that I did not end up asking. What's a good way of connecting with you?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Just look for Shawn Stewart at Apartment List. My handle is IRITEK. That's IRIETEK. Reach out, send me a message. I'd be happy to respond.
Okay, awesome. Shawn, thanks for being on the show. I really do appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Amir.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again, a different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, please share this episode with somebody else that might find value in it. I think Shawn went through and really talked about that relationship of the IC, the manager, and the team, which is a key component in this. And we talked about things that a manager can do, things a manager should be looking at, what an IC should do during that interview process. I think Shawn had great examples and insights. So please keep sharing this episode. Also, like, subscribe, comment, leave me a review. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.